there exists an old Scottish tradition that the last person to be buried in a graveyard would watch over the resting bodies of all the other spirits that resigned within. Their vigil would last until the next death, where they would be replaced by a new guardian. This was the practice known as the Faire Chlaidh. The Highland people in specific had a very deep connection to death and spirituality. They fully believed in the boundary between the seen and the unseen. Once a friend or loved one had fallen, they would now exist in an immortal spiritual form on the other side, beneath the fairy mounds, or as some know it, the land of elfhame. But the remains of their physical form were firmly rooted to our realm, and as such required protection from such things as desecration, grave robbers, black magics, and dishonour. This is why there was always, and will always be, a watcher in the graveyard. That feeling of unease we all feel while walking among the burial stones could very well be the withering eye of a spectral guardian. This old tradition demonstrates the importance of community and the rights of the dead within the Highland way of life. Although the Faire Chlaidh was a prodigious position, and the most recent grave would commonly be tended and visited by all locals to show gratitude for their sacrificial watch, it nonetheless shackled the spirit to this realm, not allowing them to pass peacefully to the unseen. The families of the watcher did not want their vigil to last for too long, and hoped they would soon continue on to rest in the afterlife. This, as you can imagine, caused no end of disagreements, and an anecdote concerning one such argument was told by the Lochaber bard John MacDonald. He tells that on one afternoon a young minister was out for a walk around the parish, meeting and greeting his new flock. But when he reached the ford of the Spean River, he saw two groups of strangers heading towards the cemetery from two differing directions. Both were all in black, and both carried a large wooden coffin. As the two parties met at the entrance to the graveyard, the minister heard raised voices, and quickened his pace. But by the time he reached the gate, he found the coffins laying upon the ground, and the two groups now combined into one furious punch-up. Fists connected with jaws, kicks with shins, and many a hat was knocked up on the ground. The brave minister ran straight between the opposing forces, and screamed for this madness to halt. The two funeral parties would cease their squabbling, and all felt a bit sheepish, looking at the holy man between them. The minister asked the meaning of this battle, and why they dared desecrate holy ground with such violence. The old tradition of the Faire Chlaidh was then explained to the new minister, and how the fight started with an argument about which body would be buried first, and which would be left as the graveyard's restless sentinel. It was decided that a straightforward fight would be the best to determine the order, but now both groups were at a total loss. MacDonald does not go on to mention how this situation was eventually fixed. Perhaps the minister let the families continue their battle, or resorted to a less destructive method. Either way, we can see just how important this tradition was to the families of the recently deceased. Many feared for their loved one, who had either already lived through a great many years, or suffered some horrible tragedy, or worse yet, be the last person ever to be buried in that graveyard, condemning them to an eternity held within a realm that they do not belong in. Although it was believed by some that a mortal man may take upon himself the role of the watcher, that is, if the correct bargain has been struck, something that is shown in a short tale from John Grigorson Campbell. It was a well-known fact in the parish of Morven that buried in the churchyard of Kiel there was a body of a beautiful Spanish princess. This poor woman had been aboard one of the Armada ships which were sunk in the Bay of Tobermory. It was even told by some that the legendary warrior Lachlan Moore may have been linked to the explosives placed upon the ship. This legend became well known in the local area, and since there was no name or marker for the Spanish princess, many people over the years began to believe that the tale was just a myth, a story to tell travellers and passers-by. Now some years later, in the time when Cromwell's forces had entered Scotland to remove the newly proclaimed King of Scots, Charles II, There were two friends who lived in the parish of Morven who would be forced to take up arms and go to war. Before the first battle commenced, the pair went to their ancestral church of Chlaidh and made a binding pact. Whichever the men should die first, the other man would accept their vigil and become the Faire Chlaidh. That very same day, one of the friends would fall in battle and the other would return his body to the church. The survivor kept his promise, and on the first night his friend was laid to rest, he entered the graveyard and took up his watch. To the man's amazement, it would seem he had been granted the second sight. Not only had he his own mortal vision, but also that of his departed friend. Each and every night, as the man kept his promise, he would witness the spirits of the dead rise from their graves and journey out of the churchyard in a strange procession. Oddly, there was one spirit that remained within the yard through every night, a young and beautiful woman. The new watcher would dwell on this female and wonder what kept her tied to this graveyard. After some weeks, he managed to pluck up the courage and ask the spectral figure why she tarried. She told the man that she was a Spanish princess who had lost her life very close to this church, and that the old tales had indeed been true. She explained that soon after her death, her family would return her body to Spain, and it was buried there with all the grandeur that a princess deserved. But as she was being exhumed from Chlaidh, her little finger had been left behind, and until her body was complete, she was forever trapped between the realms. The man promised that one day he would help the woman, but for now his watch must continue. After some time, another local would fall in battle, and was buried in the churchyard, freeing the first man from his spectral watch. Now knowing the truth of the princess's tale, the man would return to the graveyard and dig in the spot where the spectre lingered, and retrieved her missing finger. A desecration of the yard, which I'm sure upset the new guardian to no end. The young man would then travel to Spain, where he would finally complete the burial of the woman and allow the princess to pass into the other world. I hope you enjoyed learning about this strange tradition of the Scottish graveyard watch, or the Faire Chlaidh. It certainly is a curious ritual, and seems to have deep connections with older Celtic beliefs, which are prevalent through much of Eastern Europe, with all different societies having their own form of spectral watcher within the graveyard. This was one of the many oddities found in our history, not the ritual itself of course, but the fact that even when our lands were mostly converted to Christianity, small pockets of belief in the ancient Doynashee tradition still existed in some form, keeping the beliefs and memory of our ancestors alive throughout history. Thank you for listening, and a special thanks to my wonderful patrons who help me keep these tales alive. Slán